What to expect for life sciences in Latin. A journey of knowledge in 5 chapters. Chapter 3, Compliance in Life Sciences.
Talk a little bit of Chile, because I think so we need to give the time to know more about the US and Brazil. But only for Chile, the compliance, I started in compliance because I'm a life science and healthcare practitioner. So many years ago, when the pharmas need help, I started to help in compliance because Chile wasn't a big matter 10 years ago. And only big pharmas were interested, so I started there. But right now we have, since last 1 year and a half, we have a very important law in Chile, which determines the criminality of the companies. But before, we have this since 2009, but right now we have more than 250 crimes where we are responsible in Chile. So only to let you know, we have a compliance law in Chile. Companies are responsible, and not only because of corruption or normal crimes, more than 250. So it's a big matter right now for pharmacists in Chile. And Annie, let me know and let us know all how compliant work in the US.
So when you gave the intro and said I've been working for almost 3 decades, it is true. Before, when I started, compliance was not a big deal, even in the US. We're very highly regulated today, but I have seen the evolution of the compliance and enforcement actions over my 30-year career. Where there are several governmental agencies that now bring prosecutions for compliance violations. So we start with the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which is a primary regulator for the life sciences industry. They have several laws, of course, and regulations that require compliance. And what's interesting in the U.S. is that the statute, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, is both a civil statute as well as a criminal statute. So the same violation, depending on whether it was committed with an intent to defraud or mislead, can be a criminal case, or it can be a monetary penalties case. So really it's unusual for even the US FDA or US laws. We also have DOJ, of course, as our primary lawyers for the US government, and they have very clearly stated that life sciences industries remain in their crosshairs. And then we have HHS, the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General, which is a compliance watchdog, basically. They are, after the fact, they are looking for healthcare fraud, and that agency has become very active. They have law enforcement agents that are basically like FBI agents who investigate whether or not a crime has occurred, and then they have the authority to issue subpoenas and to refer cases to the DOJ. So lots of lawyers in the government who are out there trying to ensure that the life sciences industry is being compliant. And I think here in Brazil, I've heard you have good trade associations too, maybe not as robust as in the US, but both Pharma and AdvaMed in the US have issued their compliance codes of conduct, which is really much the gold standard in the US, even more guidance than what the government has issued. So to the extent that you're looking for like a starting placeholder for what the US government would deem compliant, I would definitely download those codes of conduct. And the last thing I want to say about compliance in US that is somewhat unique is that individuals can be held responsible. And maybe that's not as unusual, because I know in Germany, corporations can be held responsible for crimes. But in the US, it's typically the corporations are held responsible, but there's also individual exposure. And that is a huge focus of the US government over the last 10 years. They're trying to get the people who did the bad act, did not do the good act, were not compliant, to stop the conduct by holding them criminally responsible. And that's a big fear that regulatory professionals have in the US for what they need to do to comply.
Thank you, Anne, for being here. Thank you, Andrea, for the intro. So just a few initial notes. Compliance can mean many things and different things to different people, especially in the healthcare sector, which is highly regulated. So I'll stick to the corporate integrity idea of compliance for now. I'm not a healthcare lawyer. I'm a anti-bribery and in that sense, compliance lawyer. In Brazil, our main statute for this kind of compliance is our anti-corruption law of 2013, which allows the prosecution of companies for bribery and similar conduct. This applies to different industries, including healthcare. So it's not specific to healthcare, but like in the US, Brazil also has many laws and many regulators. So this is just one law. We have the criminal code applicable to individuals. We have other administrative and property laws and public bidding laws, everything composing this environment of legal framework for compliance in Brazil. And of course, this adds to the already existing regulations of the health care, specific regulators such as ANS and Anvisa, as many of you know. But just to sum up, in Brazil, for compliance at least, there is not specific regulation for this sector. The regulation that applies is the same that applies to the other sectors of other industries in Brazil.
Okay, thank you for this introduction. The idea is that everybody knows how it works in each country. Right now, we'll go for special questions. How do we, let us know how do local demands align with global standards? What will you tell about that?
So as I understand, a lot of the audience in this room are business development folks looking to build business either in Latin America or coordinating other foreign companies here in Brazil or other countries in Latin America. To the extent that the entity that you're involved with, either you're working with them or you are looking to acquire them in an M&A transaction, is a U.S. company, I would strongly encourage that when you are looking to bring them here into this market, that you apply the same compliance program universally throughout the corporation. Of course, the compliance program needs to have built-in flexibilities to account for differences in culture, differences in capabilities. But the way the U.S. looks at a compliance program is that it can be a living document and that it can be fungible to account for differences in different countries, but what they can't have is multiple different compliance programs that apply to different people that are not across the board. I see some multinational companies here, so they probably recognize the U.S. is very stringent on how a compliance program is set up. And if they start seeing a lot of deviations from it, that's really a signal that there's something that's not under control. So would not recommend changing a compliance program that's already established in the US. But on the flip side, if you're a Latin American country, a company going into the US and don't have a robust compliance program yet, but you're looking to enter the US market, do not feel that you need to have a compliance program that is the same as what the Pharma Trade Association puts out as their code of conduct. I think the US government would treat you just like any other startup company that's domestic, and you have to build your program based on what the priorities and risk areas are. And there is definitely an understanding about that. So, definitely don't feel like you need to establish that right up at the front side. I think that's all I have on that.
From the Brazilian perspective, as soon we have here local Brazilian companies and Brazilian branches of international groups. For the local companies, of course, it's advisable to build a compliance program in Brazil, following the guidelines of our maybe main compliance regulator when we talk about anti-bribery compliance, which is CGU. At the federal level, at least, they have several guidelines on what a robust or good compliance program should have. This is the main source you should look for. But for the international groups coming to Brazil, already established or trying to make their compliance programs adapted to the Brazilian reality, I agree with Anne. in the sense that you should not look to change the whole thing and make a new program that is specific for Brazil. This probably won't work out because the structures inside of the group wouldn't allow this to happen in an efficient manner anyway. But the Brazilian regulators, they are somewhat strict in having their own requirements there in the compliance program applicable to Brazil. I must say that having an anti-bribery compliance program is not legally mandatory in Brazil. For most sectors, there are a few exceptions, so there is no law saying that you must have a compliance program with that and that characteristics, otherwise you will be penalized. This does not exist. But it's encouraged, and different laws and regulations, they encourage that you have a compliance program, and having that you may have some benefits. One of the benefits, for instance, is that if you are investigated for a violation, a company is investigated for a violation of the anti-corruption law, it has a robust compliance program, this will make your fine be much lower than if you don't have it. So in that sense, keeping the general structure of the group, but tailoring it to the requirements of the guidelines of the CGU is probably the recommended path here for this kind of groups operating in Brazil.
Thank you, Alberto. And yes, only to add that Chile, we are a small country. So the challenge that we had past year was saying the big pharmas, big companies, that you need to adjust your compliance model. But of course, they said, we're not going to change no model of our compliance system. Our compliance system is what we have here in the US or Europe. Like, that is what we have. How will we make it happen according to local law that was public 1 year and a half away? And what we had to do is not, of course, change all the matters, all the compliance program. We need to review what we had and see how to create create a program from Chile, like a division of the program, because we have more than 250 crimes right now. So we need to review if those crimes apply to the industry that we were seeing, and in this case was pharma. And it depends, of course, it was a medical device company or cosmetic company. So we start to do that. And that was a big challenge because, of course, the companies didn't want to do it. But, well, finally, the law is very, very hard. It's very, you have multas, how you say? Fines very high. So you really need to take care of it. And that is what we have been doing the past year and a half in the big pharmas. Well, even not only big pharmas, smaller pharmas, I have companies that started with one employee, and the first thing that they said is like, I need a compliance program because probably this what is the main matter to my relation. They need to know that I'm strong on compliance. So let's go to the next question. I know, Alberto, you're not a healthcare a lawyer, but let us know what are the relation in the compliance matter with healthcare professional.
Yeah, so just very briefly, when we are talking about compliance, anti-corruption risk in general, two of the main sources of concern is, of course, relationships with the government, public officials, and the use of third-party intermediaries to deal with other parties, including the government. And this happens a lot in the healthcare industry. You have governments as the regulator, as the client, as a partner. In the case of healthcare providers, you have associations, distributors that deal on your behalf before those entities. So I'll just say that those are, for sure, the main sources of compliance concerning the industry. And if you are tailoring your program to address compliance risks and corruption risks, those are the elements you should devote most of your attention to.
I agree. And in interest of time, just a quick anecdote. I'm right now negotiating a settlement with the government where the company was a small company, they relied heavily on distributors because they didn't have the infrastructure in the US only, no imports or anything like that. But they relied heavily on distributors. The distributors went a little crazy and marketed the product very aggressively for uses that they shouldn't have. The government is started at $500 million for our exposure. And now they're down to 80 million, but it still is tremendous exposure for a company that did not themselves do the act. It was through their distributors.
Yeah, and let's go. How can we see the ways that compliance can support strategies and alliance? And maybe we can, since we are short of time, go to the next question. I know we have the corporate integrity agreements. Yeah, I don't have it, so maybe you can talk about more about that. But let's start with the way that compliance can support. Of course, I'm just gonna say, of course, due diligence, and when we're talking about an M&A or acquisition, selling, it will be the main matter. Right now, every M&A that I have, at least in Chile, the compliance is an issue. The reps and warrant has to be there, and they're paying more attention of that. And so now when we want to help a company and make that strategy, we have to say, well, do you have a compliance system? Let's review your metrics, how is going on, and it is this according local law or not? So let us, Alberto, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. So for how compliance can support strategic alliances, I think the answer for Brazil will be potentially the same for the US or Chile. Good due diligence will allow you either to abandon a deal that is too risky or move forward with the deal, but with the remedies and precautions that are advisable to that situation, including self-disclosure. Many of the most relevant leniency agreements in Brazil in the recent past, maybe excluding Lava Jato, but others, either in cartel cases or corruption cases, they happen after an acquisition where the acquirer identified something very serious that merited the disclosure. And for corporate integrity agreements, yes, this has been a trending in Brazil for the last 10 years in different forms and shapes. We have nothing really specific to the healthcare industry. What we have in the healthcare industry is the same that applies to other industries. CGU and the prosecutors are the main enforcers seeking those agreements. They can be the larger cases, which are settled through leniency agreements, where the company settling brings evidence about wrongdoings of others and commits to several obligations, paying fines, enhancing compliance programs, so on and so forth. And we have a lighter form of leniency agreement in Brazil, which is the current term of commitment, is a new settlement regime that the CGU has been pushing forward in the last years, also for bribery cases mainly and bid rigging. Yeah, I'll leave to that, but just summing up to say that settlements have been a strong trend in Brazil. Maybe not so much in the healthcare industry so far. There have been a few cases, not so many, but in general, yes, they have been.
And just on a positive note, with respect to how compliance can support alliances strategically, either multinationally or within the company, within the same country, you can use your compliance program to show off how good you are. The management reports that are being reviewed hopefully will demonstrate that there's control over the system and control over the company's activities. So it's not always negative that your compliance program is one that is going to cause somebody to walk away. There are ways to show that there's control, even if there are certain, minor non-compliances. So, I think the compliance program is something that can be a double-edged sword, but we still in the US must have one that is very strong. And then to your point about corporate integrity agreements, which is really a unique, sorry, you and I are playing this.
I will.
So that really a unique thing for the healthcare life sciences industry in the US. It doesn't apply to all industries, but these are agreements that are part of a government settlement, where a company agrees to a 5-year term to establish a super robust monitoring program over their compliance. I would say most of the big pharma companies and big medical device companies have been subject to a compliance or corporate integrity agreement at some point. And that's why they're all clean house now. But it is a unique thing, but they're very expensive. And that trade-off is that you don't get criminally prosecuted. So that's how we do it in the US.
What to expect for life sciences in Latin. A journey of knowledge in 5 chapters.